All right, everyone, we will now go ahead and get started with today's webinar. So good morning, good afternoon, wherever you find yourself in the world. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Every year, we here at Invicti crunch a tremendous amount of data that are compiled from our SaaS products and turn this into our annual Invicti AppSec Indicator report. We do this in order to really understand the state of web application security today, and we're very excited to have shared the findings with you if you've seen the report that came out earlier this week, and then also to have the opportunity to deep dive into the results in today's session. So within the GoToWebinar interface, you have the opportunity to submit questions. Please do submit those questions as they arise via the questions pane, and I will dive into the Q&A after the presentation. So my name is Mark Rawls. I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer here at Invicti. At Invicti, our mission is to really transform how application security gets done. And we're very, very passionate about working with our customers to help them truly secure and protect everything and everyone. As I like to say, we don't make the apps that you use every day, but we help make them more secure. And it's a really important mission and a really important goal for us. So let's talk a little bit about today's agenda. In this session, we're going to briefly look about the report's methodology. We want to make sure that you understand how we gather this information and that you can have a lot of trust and faith in the results. And then we're going to zoom in on the findings. We'll walk through some of the worst security flaw offenders that still plague DevSecOps teams, like all of you, presumably, today. And then finally, we'll aim to provide you with some insight into what can be done to improve the situation. All hope is not lost. Before we do that, I would like to quickly introduce Invicti. So Invicti is a global leader in web application security since 2005. We help more than 3,000 customers of all sizes, all industries across every geography secure all of their web applications, whether those web applications are in development or in production. So let's dive into today's topic. As I've mentioned, every year, Invicti strives to get a deeper insight into the state of web application security. We look at the data with the aim of finding out if severe vulnerabilities are getting any scarcer. Now, obviously, there are always a tremendous amount of low or moderate severity vulnerabilities, but that's not really the mission of Invicti and what we're here to do. We really try to focus and dig in on, especially in this call and in our AppSec Indicator report, around the most severe vulnerabilities, those that can truly be exploited, in the wild, that can lead to, costly and expensive data breaches. That's where our focus is. Unfortunately, every year we confirm that unfortunately the short answer is no. These vulnerabilities are not getting scarcer. They aren't going away. And therefore, the work of application security teams and application security professionals, such as all of you, remains more important than ever. For this edition of the Invicti AppSec Indicator, we really dug in and leaned in and developed a deeper and richer data set than we've ever had before. We've analyzed aggregate usage data, I should say anonymized and aggregated usage data from almost 1,000 global Invicti customers. Our customers have performed more than 23 billion security checks just in the last year. And our products have reported over 280,000 direct impact vulnerabilities. Again, vulnerabilities that could truly lead to a breach, a loss of data, and more. These are all vulnerabilities that could have serious consequences if they're exploited remotely by malicious actors. And thanks to proof-based scanning, which is an Invicti technology that we apply to ensure that vulnerabilities are real, our products are able to automatically confirm 94% of these direct impact vulnerabilities with basically 100% accuracy. I think our false positive rate on those that we've confirmed is less than 1 in 5,000 detected vulnerabilities. So again, that proves that these are real issues, and the data that you're going to see, or the data that you've seen as you've read the report, is is accurate and reflects the true state of the world today. So what does this mean? It means that all of this information has given us a very holistic view of vulnerability trends based on our automated scan results across industries, across company sizes, and across geographic regions. And we'll dive into these with you in just a minute. So as part of this analysis, we've discovered some alarming trends. So let's take a look at these vulnerability trends in more detail. So just starting out, what we've done here is pull together a chart that summarizes our top high severity vulnerabilities and the trends over the last 4 years that we've run this report from 2018 to 2021. This 4-year snapshot shows the percentage of customers by license that encountered at least one vulnerability of the given type in the given year. In other words, we're showing how often we've helped companies automatically discover high severity vulnerabilities like remote code execution, cross-site scripting, and many others. You can see the figures are hovering around the same numbers year after year after year, or even in some cases increasing slightly. So overall, vulnerabilities are definitely not going away. One thing to keep in mind as we go through this is that every year Invicti has grown in size and in the number of customers that we are helping support along their application security journey. And so the number of customers reflected in the 2018 data is much smaller than the number in 2021. And in fact, our 2021 data set, about 30% of those 1,000 customers were new to Invicti in 2021. And so this reflects their journey as they've started along with Invicti to discover what their true state of AppSec security is. If we drill in a little bit and we just look at the data comparison for 2021 versus the prior year, we can see a lot of the same, with most vulnerabilities like remote code execution, server-side request forgery, and others are rising by 1 to 3% year over year. It's very important that we understand these trends, as for example, this year's top offenders like RCE, remote code execution, XSS, cross-site scripting, and SQL injection can lead to some pretty serious consequences. For example, compromised backend data, hijacked sessions, or forced actions on behalf of other users and services. One of the things that we really focus on here at Invicti, and therefore we focus on our AppSec Indicator report, is that what security teams really need to understand, what CISOs really need to understand is what is the true risk. Reporting a bunch of low severity vulnerabilities that don't truly represent a risk of exploit isn't valuable. And in fact, it actually is of negative value. It distracts the team. It confuses the picture of understanding what your true security posture is. And that's why in our AppSec Indicator report and in our work with our customers, we really focus on those vulnerabilities that truly have serious consequences. So let's zoom in and look at this in more detail. And we'll go through these top offenders and talk about each one in turn. So the first one on the list, remote code execution, or RCE. To understand why this is top of the pile, we only have to go back a few months and remember the absolute whirlwind impact of Log4Shell as businesses around the globe scrambled to check whether or not they were vulnerable to RCE attacks in the widely used Log4j library. Because remote code execution has such far-reaching consequences, it really is considered the ultimate goal of any cyber attacker. Even just a single RCE vulnerability in a production environment puts an organization at risk of complete system compromise. And unfortunately, what we've seen in our 2021 AppSec Indicator is that RCE has seen a steady and worrisome increase since 2018, and in fact jumped 5% in frequency over the time period of our report, and is up significantly even just since 2020. So our next vulnerability that we'll look into is server-side request forgery, or SSRF. SSRF happens when an attacker is able to masquerade as a web application when communicating with other websites, applications, or systems. How dangerous is it? Well, the reality is more and more dangerous every single day, as many web applications are now relying on implicitly trusted APIs for internal communication. That means that SSRF attacks can be especially dangerous, as they can allow attackers to obtain unauthenticated API access via a trusted server. As an example, just back in 2019, a misconfigured web application firewall allowed Paige Thompson, a very troubled individual, to gain access to data from approximately 106 million Capital One customers in the United States and Canada. Again, a huge, very damaging exploit. And although this incident put the world on high alert, SSRF continues to see a steady climb, and we see that it's back up to being found in 15% of organizations in 2021. So let's move on to another top offender, and in fact, this is kind of, if you will, one of the elder statesmen, I would say, of our report today and of web application vulnerabilities, and of course, that is SQL injection. SQL injection is a vulnerability that allows malicious actors to modify or replace queries that an application sends to its database. Technically speaking, SQL injection is very easy to prevent with modern web languages and frameworks. I mean, quite frankly, I think any of us who have been in the industry very long are frankly shocked at the continued prevalence of SQL injection attacks. But it really is a reminder that application security starts with development and with educating developers to correctly and consistently use available safeguards. It's a worrisome sign, and frankly a call to action, that SQL injection continues to be so prevalent. And it really does continue to cause challenges even today. As recently as 2019, there was a very well-publicized SQL injection attack vulnerability that resulted in the theft of tax data for millions of Bulgarian citizens. Records dating back up to 10 years were exposed on underground forums, and those records included full names, income information, personal identification number, social benefits, and more. This is why we at Invicti work so hard at what we do around application security, because I know, for one, I don't want my data exposed, that of my friends, of my family, and that's exactly what happened because of an SQL injection vulnerability, in a Bulgarian tax system. Let's double click a little bit on SQL, because again, I think this is an area that we all thought would be solved by now. By 2022, surely this wouldn't continue to be an issue. So let's understand a little bit better about where those issues might be. And this is an area that we dug into our data to really understand from an industry basis, where do we see more of the problem? So in our data, we found that 35% of educational institutions and 32% of government organizations, such as the Bulgaria example, found at least one SQL injection vulnerability. What does this mean? Well, the reality of application security is that it is not all about securing the latest and greatest cutting edge applications. That's certainly where we all love to focus and love to spend our time. But the fact is that many organizations, such as education, government, I would also add financial services, perhaps telecommunications, have significant legacy code bases, legacy applications that need modernizing and need that right away. But the fact is, it's very expensive to do. It's very expensive to overhaul and rip and replace those systems. It's very high risk. And therefore, these legacy applications are here to stay. And so fortunately, one of our approaches is that we understand we have to secure the legacy and we have to secure the cutting edge. We have to cover both, and we have to do both equally well, because at the end of the day, we aren't succeeding in our mission of helping secure everything and everyone if we aren't able to secure both those legacy applications and modern applications. And so again, this data points to the fact that the reason SQL injection continues to be so pervasive and so prevalent is not actually that cutting edge applications are experiencing problems with SQL injection. They may be. I'm sure there are examples where they are, but a lot of this boils back to legacy code, legacy applications that must be addressed and must be secured. But if you don't know you have the problem, you can't go back and secure it. And again, that's our mission every day at Invicti. Looking next, let's talk about local file inclusion. So what is LFI? So LFI is a vulnerability that allows bad actors to trick a web application into exposing or running specific files on the server. Historically, what we've really seen, and I'm sure the audience knows this, LFI vulnerabilities have primarily been associated with PHP. So their presence in our reports, we feel is very safely correlated with the continued popularity of PHP-based applications and plugins, of which, of course, the 800-pound gorilla is WordPress. And after a little bit of dip in our data in 2019, unfortunately, LFI seems to be, back in business. It's grown in 2020. It grew again in 2021. One notable example of a breach due to LFI was a 2016 attack on a website called Adult Friend Finder. And it showed us just how dangerous LFI vulnerabilities can be. Bad actors were able to use this exploit to access information for 400 million user accounts. That information included emails, passwords, confidential data such as relationship status. And not only is the problem the specific breach of a website like this one, it's also those email addresses, those passwords may be reused on other sites. They may be used as company logins. And so the fact that this much information is out there is very detrimental, even if it's easy to kind of step back and say, well, that's a kind of different type of website. That's not a mainstream web application, perhaps. Well, no, it's not. But the impact can be much, much broader. And so therefore, we really have to pay attention to issues like LFI and seek to correct those as well. So let's now look at operating system command injection, or simply command injection. This is a web vulnerability that lets attackers execute system commands through a web application. It's an often overlooked flaw, but OS command injection saw an alarming jump from 2020 to 2021, where it actually doubled in the incident rate that we discovered. And if you want to know just how bad command injection can be, you just need to look at shell shock, a widely known vulnerability that enabled malicious actors to inject OS commands and therefore take control. Within hours of this vulnerability being disclosed in 2014, or of a command injection vulnerability being disclosed in 2014, attackers were able to exploit the flaw, create computer botnets, and perform millions of DDoS attacks worldwide. Again, it's not necessarily the individual breach that's so damaging, but the way that bad actors are able to then leverage that vulnerability more broadly and do more destructive activities, again, such as DDoS. Let's move on to another top offender, cross-site scripting, or XSS. Again, right there with SQL injection, cross-site scripting is one of the founding OG members of the Web Application Exploit Club. It's one of the most common flaws that we see, and it saw a slight improvement in 2020, where it was down slightly versus 2019, only to bounce back with our highest reading ever in 2021. It's a common web vulnerability that allows attackers to inject malicious JavaScript code and execute it in the user's browser. And this is considered a low impact vulnerability by many developers. But the reality is that cross-site scripting is dangerous because it opens the way to sensitive data disclosure. It allows session hijacking. It allows redirects to malicious sites. It could allow malware installation. It can facilitate social engineering attacks. So it really is a serious vulnerability. And this isn't just something that's found in smaller or less sophisticated organizations. For anyone who has followed cybersecurity, I'm sure you read in 2018 when British Airways made the headlines because a cross-site scripting exploit led to a breach that impacted almost 400,000 transactions. Now, of course, security researchers suspect the attack was linked to MageCart, which is obviously a very notorious hacking group that uses card skimming. They use malicious code injections and otherwise in order to exploit cross-site scripting. But the AppSec Indicator tells us that these flaws are still slipping under the radar. We are still falling victim where time-strapped development teams that haven't been given the proper training, the proper tools, are still sending these through into development builds. Hopefully they're getting caught before production. I mean, that's why Invicti exists and what we try to support our customers in doing. But again, if we're seeing such a high rate, again, 70% of customers in our sample set saw cross-site scripting vulnerabilities in 2021. This is still clearly a huge challenge to be overcome. So finally, let's close our overview of these top offenders with cross-site request forgery, or CSRF. So CSRF is a credentials management flaw that gives attackers the ability to trick end users into performing unintended operations. Again, one of the oldest web vulnerability classes, but something that continues to appear frequently despite well-known server-side mitigations. And so we can expect advances in browser security to continue to make CSRF less prevalent, but in fact, our reliance on advances in browser security actually in some ways is a danger, because what it means is that it can create a sense of complacency within security teams, within dev teams, that maybe CSRF isn't something you need to train on or you need to educate on because you'll be covered by the browser. But what we've seen in practice is that this is not consistently the case. And so therefore CSRF is something that we need to continue to pay a lot of attention to because we continue to see those vulnerabilities. So I think this is a good time. I've talked quite a bit as we've gone through this list about the vulnerabilities that we've seen, the fact that we expected to see a lot of improvement by now. In many of these cases, many of these vulnerabilities have been a challenge really since the dawn of applications and application development. And so, why is this? Why do we keep seeing these vulnerabilities? Well, in the incredible environment that we're in, this incredible transformation that we've seen with the shift to cloud that really started to occur in kind of 2010, 2013, that time frame, and then really accelerated to the present day. It then kind of went on turbo boost with hybrid workforces and with a COVID environment. It's never been more clear that web application security, that AppSec needs to stay top of mind for organizations, regardless of size, regardless of industry, regardless of geography. But really, for those who are adjusting, who are adjusting to hybrid work with the increased demands and workload, with the difficulties, around staffing teams, what we're finding is that 69% of organizations still find that it's really hard to get institutional buy-in and to drive alignment around security hygiene and posture management. And we're finding that those difficulties are increasing. It's just the playing field is increasingly stacked against security teams, which is a huge challenge. You layer on top of that, one of the common headlines today, talking about the Great Resignation, which I actually prefer to think of as the Great Reckoning, as what I think you consistently see is that employees that are underappreciated, perhaps undercompensated, overburdened, and I think I just described almost every security professional in existence, is seeking greener pastures and seeking new opportunities. And so this is exacerbating what was already a massive talent shortage in security. According to ESG, 70% of the members of the Information Systems Security Association, ISSA, cite the skill gap in cybersecurity as having an impact of their customers or on their company. I've talked to Invicti customers who have said, look, I've got the budget, I've got the open recs, I just can't hire enough people. And so therefore, I've got one security professional per 500 developers. That just doesn't work if you don't have the tools and you don't have the processes and you don't have the right culture and ethos around security. You're just never going to be able to keep up. Which leads to another point. So one of the things that we did in a previous AppSec Indicator report is survey our customers to understand better the relationship between security teams and development teams, and understand that what we as Invicti can do to help make those things better on both sides of that relationship. And what we found in terms of understanding the current state was pretty staggering. 51% of a web developer's time is spent chasing security issues. 80% of respondents noted that security processes were delaying delivery times, either somewhat or significantly. And again, this is in a world where development teams are being pressured because of competitive pressures and market dynamics to release faster and faster and faster to get new features out the door. So this obviously creates a huge challenge. And one of the results of that challenge is the statistic you see in the middle, which is 1 in 3 security issues that are under remediation actually make it all the way through to production, without getting flagged or fixed in the test or development stages. It's a very large problem. And again, this is one that will hamper innovation if it's unchecked and if it leads to serious security risks, if it leads to data breaches, as it builds up in terms of security debt, if you're not paying close enough attention. So, so I'm sure all of you would know, what to do. How do we keep these vulnerabilities at bay without sacrificing innovation? Without being a blocker, to product releases and to competitive success in the marketplace. So we here at Invicti, it's our belief that every organization is capable of unlocking innovation by weaving in security and making it part of everyone's job. This is one reason that we have the largest, broadest, deepest set of integrations into developer tools, as any AppSec provider in the space. Because what we really believe is that when security is part of everyone's job, when it's ingrained in the culture, then risk reduction is no longer competing with Agile. It's no longer competing with modern dev practices. Instead, they can work together and jointly focus on how do you remove barriers, how do you speed up delivery times of secure applications. So let's look at some of the foundational elements for a healthy security posture. This is something that we at Invicti think quite a bit about, and there are really 5 main areas that I'd like to briefly talk about. Application security programs come in all shapes and sizes, and there are many paths to success here, but every successful AppSec program, we believe, has these 5 foundational elements in common. So number 1, you've got to prioritize secure design. You've got to prioritize baking in security into your pre-code processes, into your application architecture. So again, this has to be a priority from the very top of the engineering and architecture orgs. Secondly, you have to break down silos between security and development. You've got to empower teams to work cross-functionally when security roadblocks come up. Again, this is one of the reasons that we focus so much on building integrations into developer tools, ticketing systems, pipeline tools, because we've got to go meet developers where they are, and we have to do so with 100% accuracy in terms of the issues we send to them for remediation. And again, this is why we spend so much time investing in proof-based scanning, and why we're so proud of the fact that fewer than 1 in 5,000 vulnerabilities that we mark as confirmed vulnerabilities actually turn out to be false positives. Number 3, you've got to make security part of every stage of the software development lifecycle. You've got to scan in development. You should be scanning nightly builds. You should scan early and often and in a comprehensive way. And then you also need to scan production apps. Again, many of the breaches that we see are not actually in modern applications that are in active development. As we saw with education, with government, a lot of these are legacy applications that are probably not being actively developed. They're sitting out there in production, but they could represent a risk to the organization. Number 4, you have to invest in robust tools. Again, we aren't going to fill the cybersecurity skills gap anytime soon. And even if we could magically conjure, the number of security professionals we need, the fact is you want those security pros working on interesting, complex, challenging problems that only a human can solve. You need your tools to be doing the base work, to be doing the validation of vulnerabilities, to be proving out false positives prior to it going to a developer. And you need robust tools that can do that, and tools that can also give you the reporting and the analytics you require in order to monitor success. And finally, as I've talked about over and over again, the horse that I've beat dead here is you need tools that have low false positive rates. You need clear, actionable guidance for developers and meet them where they are. So there is light at the end of the horizon, right? As organizations struggle to reduce risk, bringing in the right combination of people, of tools, of processes, with clear top-down initiatives, we really believe that organizations can get much more secure, and we have a lot of confidence in that belief because we see it every day, with our customers. And so it's probably a little bit beneficial or a little bit helpful to put it in those customers' words instead of my own. We've had customers that, through automation and integration with the CI/CD, are able to speed up the process. They're able to take manual work out, and ultimately they're able to get more secure and faster. You also have to have a very easy to use tool. You've got to, again, meet developers where they are. You have to allow your security pros to spend as little time as possible managing the tool, as much time as possible, really diving into those higher order challenges and issues. And that's, again, what customers are able to do, with our products. So that concludes, my, kind of prepared remarks, if you will. I know we've gotten a number of great questions in, thus far. And so what I'd like to do is just start taking those questions. If you have additional questions, feel free to drop those in, but let me get started with a couple that have come in. So one of the first ones is our survey measuring, components being used that are potentially susceptible to exploit, or are they actually verified exploits across your customers? That's an excellent question. It's a really good point. And so our products are primarily in nature DAST products, so dynamic application security testing products. What this means is that it is a black box tool, kind of a simulated hack that goes after web applications that you point it towards, and again seeks to exploit it. One of the analogies that I've used before is it's locking all your windows, locking all your doors, and then hiring someone to try to break into your house and to expose to you where the vulnerabilities are. What Invicti does, and why we believe our data is so powerful exactly to this question, is that Invicti doesn't just look at the window and say, hey, I don't know that that lock is sturdy enough, or I think that lock is positioned in such a way it could be open from the outside. Rather, what we do and what our products do through what we call proof-based scanning, which is a technology that no one else on the market has, is that we actually attempt to open that window. And if we're successful, we provide evidence of that successful exploit. And so when we talk about these vulnerabilities and the incident rate that we see, this isn't a survey, this isn't self-reported data, it's actual data from our products of verified vulnerabilities that are truly exploitable in the wild. It's real data from real life development and testing environments. But that's a great question. So another question that we got in was, obviously this data is concerning. Why is the situation getting worse? What are the real reasons? And I think this is another great question, and thank you for asking. We've got to be a little bit careful about saying that things are better or saying they're worse, because the wider context of this report is that these are vulnerabilities, real exploitable vulnerabilities, but they were found with the explicit purpose of remedying them, of fixing them. Our customers can and do test heavily in development. They'll test nightly builds, again, through scheduling and with the scalability of the platform and the speed of tests, they're able to test very early and very often. And so the vast majority of the vulnerabilities that we're talking about actually never made it to a live application. So in reality, it isn't all doom and gloom. The available tools are improving by leaps and bounds. Not just our tool, frankly, there's a lot of exciting movement in the space. A lot of fantastic companies and a lot of fantastic providers out there that are helping companies find security issues and to fix them. Why are they still coming up? Again, it's the usual suspects. It's skill gaps, time pressure, insufficient integration, and you can't fix what you don't know about. And so if organizations don't have early testing and frequent testing, they just quite simply aren't aware of the issues. And again, 30% of this sample set is customers that adopted Invicti in 2021. And this represents, in many ways, their first scans as they seek what's out there. And so while web application security is very hard to get right, while it is a constantly moving target, the attackers, the bad actors they work very hard, they're very smart, they're very innovative, so are we, so are all of you. And so we truly believe that the situation actually is getting better, but obviously there's still quite a bit of work left to do. We had another question on whether there's on-premise scanning. And yes, this data set that you're seeing, while these are all from our SaaS or cloud-based products, our products do have deployable local scanning agents that even when you're using the SaaS product, you are able to scan on-premise. We also offer an on-premise version of our software, but that data and the results from those customers is not actually reflected, in this report. So another question that has come in is to explain a little bit about the 23 billion tests in 1 year. That's such a huge number. Can we explain that a little bit more and unpack that? And so what we mean when we say 23 billion, that was actually 23 billion security checks. And each security check in turn is one attempt to find a vulnerability. So if we go back to that house analogy, it's one way of attacking that window and that lock on that window. Can I brute force and kind of push open that window? That would be one security check. Could I use some sort of object or credit card in order to try to slide the lock open? That would be a second security check. And so our customers integrate Invicti products into their dev pipelines, into their ticketing tools. And so they scan at multiple stages of the application lifecycle. They test early, they test often. Customers that leverage our Jira integration, when we find a vulnerability, we create a ticket specific to that developer. When that developer closes off that ticket and says they fixed that vulnerability, well, we automatically retest, thus queuing up an additional security check. And so across our entire customer base, that is, thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of scans, and each scan can run, up to, several thousand security checks. And so as our customers scan hundreds or even thousands of sites and applications on a regular basis, that 23 billion check number is a grand total as you add up all those scans, all those applications, and all those checks within that. That's a great question, though. Thank you for that. Let's see. One of the other questions that we've received is, back on and I think I kind of already answered this, but the improvements in browser security. So will that eliminate things like CSRF or cross-site scripting, XSS? We do think there's reason for optimism with CSRF, anti-CSRF tokens, same site cookies, et cetera. There's increasingly good browser support, and so there's reason for optimism, but you have to realize that there's still work to be done on the application side and work that has to be done correctly. And so we do think CSRF is not going to fully go away. We think we'll continue to find examples of implementation or configuration challenges that aren't actually giving the protection that an organization might believe is there. So we believe we have to continue to test for it, but we think there's some reason for optimism. On cross-site scripting, this goes back to the fact that malicious actors, black hat hackers, I have to give them, unfortunately, a little bit of credit. They are quite smart and quite ingenious, and they work very, very hard. And so it really is an arms race between new ways of injecting JavaScript and new ways of detecting and preventing it. You know, for a while, browsers were building in cross-site scripting filters that were getting built in, but the fact is that they only prevented a fraction of XSS possible attacks. And in many cases, you know, vendors are pulling those back out because they just aren't effective. And again, this gets back to setting up a little bit of perverse incentives where if developers believe that the browser is going to solve cross-site scripting, then that removes some of the pressure and some of the impetus and focus on ensuring that cross-site scripting, that you don't introduce potential for cross-site scripting. And so we really believe it's something that really is, you know, here to stay unless we get, you know, enough and proper hygiene. You know, the browser is not going to be the solution in this case. One other question that just came in is what proportion of the exploited vulnerabilities you find are actually out in the wild in production versus being found, you know, within the development lifecycle, and therefore could have or should have been mitigated. Unfortunately, this is not something that we have sufficient insight from our, you know, from our test data and from our sample set. You know, as we are just incredibly focused and disciplined about the level of anonymity that we need to have, you know, as we pull this data together and aggregate it, that prevents us from understanding the specific applications that are being tested, whether or not those are in production or in development. Again, this is one of our core values. You know, security is so deeply part of what we do. You know, we want to make sure that we are handling our customer data with just the utmost of care. And so again, you know, we don't get into that level of data where we could, you know, start to assess or entertain whether this is a, you know, production or externally facing application or whether it's an internal application. You know, but I would say that based on our discussions with customers and the work that we do, you know, the vast majority of scans are being run in development. And, you know, that gives us, you know, a measure of confidence that really these are getting caught before they get to production. Now, that does not apply, as I said, to legacy applications that are not in active development. And so as you see some of the vulnerabilities that we find more in legacy applications, regrettably, I do think those are in production. However, they likely entered those production environments, you know, years ago, if not a decade or more. So I know we got a few other questions that were a little bit more specific to specific customer environments or their situation. We have taken down all of those questions and we will endeavor to get back to you and communicate back to you on a one-to-one basis. But I've really enjoyed this time with you to talk through our latest Invicti AppSec Indicator report. Hope you found this valuable as well. Please feel free, we will send out the recording. Feel free to share that, you know, within your networks and within your organization. And as always, if there's anything that we Invicti can do to help you become more secure, to help you build security into your development process and into your security posture, you know, we would love to have that conversation. So thank you so much, everyone. This is my great pleasure, and wish you all a wonderful rest of your day, however much longer that happens to be wherever you are in the world. Thanks so much.